All right, my friends, we are back. And wow, the last little bit of the story, that witch is so angry and so mean, and she turned those poor little woodland creatures into statues. So Edmund has pretty much figured out that there's no good side of her, is there? No, not even a bit. So here's what happens. Now they were steadily racing on, and as soon as Edmund noticed that the snow which splashed against them as they rushed through it was much wetter than it had been the last night, at the same time he noticed that he was feeling much less cold. It was also becoming foggy. In fact, every minute it grew foggier and warmer. Why is that? Do you guys remember? The witch had turned Narnia always into winter and never Christmas, and it was icy, icy, icy. But now things are warming up. Aslan is on the move. And the sledge was not running nearly as well as it had been running up until now because the sledge moves really fast on the ice. But when it gets slushy, all right. I just love the idea of the witch's sledge going slower. At first, he thought this was because the reindeer were tired, but soon, as he saw that they couldn't be the real reason, the sledge jerked and skidded and kept on jolting as if it had struck against stones. And however the dwarf whipped the poor reindeer, the sledge went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a curious noise all around them, but the noise of their driving and jolting and the dwarf shouting at the reindeer prevented Edmund from hearing what it was, until suddenly the sledge struck so fast that it wouldn't go at all. Oh my goodness, it was stuck. When that happened, there was a moment's silence. And in that silence, Edmund could at last listen to the noise properly. A strange, sweet, rustling, chattering noise, and yet not so strange, for he'd heard it before. If only he could remember where. Then, all at once, he did remember. It was the noise of running water. So it wasn't iced anymore, it was running. Think of a babbling brook or a trickling little stream. It's a happy little noise, isn't it? All around them, though out of sight, there were streams, chattering, murmuring, bubbling, splashing, and even in a distance, roaring. And his heart gave a great leap, though he hardly knew why, when he realized that the frost was all over, and much nearer there was a drip, drip, drip from the branches of all the trees. And then, as he looked at one tree, he saw a great load of snow slide off it. For the first time since he'd entered Narnia, he saw the dark green of a fir tree. Have you guys ever been in a wood when it's really, really snowy and seen a big chunk of snow just drop off? It's kind of fun. But he hadn't time to listen or watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit there staring, fool, get out and help." And of course Edmund had to obey. He stepped out into the snow, but it was really only slush by now, and began helping the dwarf get the sledge out of the muddy hole that it had gotten in. Then he got out in the end, and by being very cruel to the reindeer, the dwarf managed to get it to move again, and they drove a little further. Poor reindeer! They were trying to pull a sledge through mud now, and stones instead of on the ice. That was not very easy. And now the snow was really melting in earnest, and patches of green grass were beginning to appear in every direction. Unless you've looked at a world of snow as long as Edmund had been looking at it, you would hardly be able to imagine what a relief those green patches were after the endless white. Then the sledge stopped again. "It's no good, your majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't sledge in this thaw." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf. "Not with the start they've got." "Are you my counselor or my slave?" said the witch. "Do as you're told. Tie the hands of the human creature behind it and keep hold of the end of the rope, and take your whip and cut the harness of the reindeer. They'll find their own way home." Whew, she was angry, wasn't she? The dwarf obeyed, and in minutes Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could with his hands tied behind him. He kept on slipping in the slush and the mud and the wet grass. Every time he slipped, the dwarf gave him a curse and sometimes a flick with his whip. The white witch walked behind the dwarf and kept on saying, "Faster, faster!" Every moment the patches of green grew bigger. Ooh, I love it. And the patches of snow grew smaller. Every moment more and more of the trees shook off the robes of snow. Soon, wherever you looked, instead of white shapes, you saw dark green fur, or the black prickly branches of bare oaks and beeches and elms. Then the mist turned from white to gold and presently cleared away altogether. So even all the fog had disappeared and gold sunlight was coming in. Shafts of delicious sunlight struck down on the forest floor, and overhead you could see blue sky between the treetops. Soon there were more and more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly around the corner into a glade of silver birch trees, Edmund saw the ground cover in all directions with little yellow flowers. Could you imagine? Like, you could see things growing just as you're walking. I love watching flowers grow, but I see them like every couple of days they get a little bigger. Could you imagine just walking and, oh, pop some flowers, oh, pop some flowers, oh, the trees start turning green. That's Aslan's work. Coming around every corner, he could see little flowers popping up. The noise of the water grew louder. Presently, they actually crossed a stream. Beyond it, they found snowdrops growing. That's a kind of little flower, too. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf when he saw that Edmund had been turning his head to look at them, and gave the rope a vigorous jerk. All right, so Edmund's all tied, but he's seeing the flowers. He's like, "I've got to look at him. And the dwarf's like, "Mind your own business. Keep going." But of course, it didn't prevent Edmund from seeing. Only 5 minutes later, he noticed dozens of crocuses growing round the foot of an old tree, golden, purple, and white. Crocuses are some of the first flowers you see in spring come up. Then came a sound even more delicious than the sound of the water. Close behind the path they were following, a bird suddenly chirped from the branch of a tree. It was answered by a chuckle of another bird a little further off. We have so many birds in our yard, and they're so loud, but it's such a sweet sound, isn't it? Just little birds, and you feel like they're talking. They're talking back and forth, and they're sweet birds. They were talking. I think they're going to let all the wood know that Aslan's on the move. Edmund's eyes turned and saw the birds alighted on the branch, or sailing overhead, or chasing one another, having their little quarrels, or tidying up their feathers in their beaks. With their beaks. "Faster and faster," said the witch. There was no trace of fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were white clouds hurrying across it from time to time. In the wide glades there was primrose. A light breeze sprang up which scattered drops of moisture from the swaying branches and carried cool, delicious scents across the faces of the travelers. The trees began to come fully alive. The larches and birches were covered with green and with gold. Soon the beech trees had put forth their delicate, transparent leaves. As the travelers walked under them, the light also became green. The bees buzzed across their path. "This is no thaw," said the dwarf, suddenly stopping. "This is spring." "What are we to do? Your winter has been destroyed, I tell you." "This is Aslan's doing." "If either of you mentions that name again," said the witch, "he shall instantly be killed." Oh my goodness. That white witch does not like to hear that Aslan is here, but he is. Everything's gone from just a harsh winter and never Christmas to a beautiful spring with flowers coming up and the tree branches and the sun coming in and turning everything gold and green. Oh, it's a happy day when Aslan is on the move, and he is. He's in Narnia, And we're going to learn more about that tomorrow. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow.